fan of all things gaming? Are you searching for a one-stop destination where you can find everything you need to fuel your passion for Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Flesh and Blood, and Lorcana? Look no further. Welcome to XOR Games, your ultimate home for all your gaming needs. At XOR Games, we pride ourselves on offering a vast selection of the latest and greatest gaming product. Whether you're a seasoned player or just starting your gaming journey, we have everything you need to level up your collection. Calling all Warhammer and Gunpla enthusiasts, XOR Games is your go-to destination for the best prices on these incredible models. Unleash your creativity and build your dream armies or mechs with our extensive range of options. Visit us today at our store located at 51 Allen Street, Charlottetown, or check out our website at www.xorgames.com. XOR Games, your home for everything gaming. Hey everybody, my guest today is professional wrestler and owner-promoter of Red Rock Wrestling, Kowboy Mike Hughes. Mike, thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
How's it going?
It's good. Busy, but things are good.
It's awesome.
Prepping up for a new year of Red Rock Wrestling for 2024. Trying to get everything ready and situated to bring PEI another great year of wrestling action.
I can't wait. I took my son for the first time this past year. He had an absolute blast. He was so into it. He hasn't stopped talking about Bradford Montague ever since.
Excellent. Bradford's a great young up-and-coming star from Prince Edward Island, and one thing that I've always done was try to support Islanders to live their dream. I was one of very few pro wrestlers to ever come from the island, so I learned a lot of the things the hard way. So if I can make any young Islanders transition into the business easier, I'm more than happy to do that.
Yeah, no, he was fantastic. A little bit of a weird story here to start the show. I asked you about a week ago if you were interested in doing the podcast, and then a few days later, I actually seen you at the Iron Claw movie.
Yes, yeah, and I thought it was you, and I was going to ask, but I wasn't sure. Yeah.
So now that I actually have a professional wrestler to talk to, what did you think of the movie?
For me, the movie was, I knew the real story of the Von Erichs about talking. Like when I broke into wrestling, I broke in with legends like the Beast, who had worked in the Texas area and worked for the Von Erichs. So I had heard the stories firsthand, and what's shared in the public and what actually really happened. There was, I think they touched a lot on things lightly, but they didn't tell the whole story. And the whole leaving out of one of the brothers and their tragic deaths kind of struck me funny. If your story was about tragedy, but you leave out the death of another suicide of one of the brothers, then it kind of seemed strange to me. And it was apparent that it was told from Kevin's point of view.
Yeah.
And not so much maybe from everyone else. I thought it was a good movie. I thought they could have done more to build up just how big the Von Erichs were in Texas. I don't think that they did a great job of just showing how much of superstars they were in the era. I think they could have showed more about the Rose Bowl shows where they sold out the Rose Bowl. I think they could have showed just how influential they were on the community, which would have made any tragedy, any suicide, any death of a child is tragic. But I think for the sake of movie purposes, to build it up, it would have had a more dramatic effect overall for the movie. And I thought they missed on that a bit, but I think it's, if you knew nothing about wrestling and had nothing to compare it about, it was a good movie. But when you know what really happened and how it happened, I think sometimes, that was a bit, that was me picking it apart because of knowing the comparison. And what I also had to realize later is it says based on a true story and not a true story, right? So
yeah. You can get away with a lot more when you drop in the based on.
Yes, definitely.
What did you think of like the in-ring action itself? Did it look believable enough to you, or?
The guy that portrayed Harley Race was terrible. He was he looked like Harley Race, and he did a good job of talking like Harley Race, but his actual in-ring work was bad. I think Zac Efron did a great job for somebody that was, put on the spot and had to learn. I think his movement and his physique was incredible. Like
Yeah.
his physique and the other guy who played Kerry Von Erich. Now he was no Kerry Von Erich by any stretch of the imagination, and it kind of came up a little short, both literally and figuratively, of being Kerry Von Erich. But that's a big role to play. But but yeah, I thought some of it was pretty good. You know what I mean? Like for guys that have to learn, it's an extremely hard business to learn, and to be able to take believable falls. Now I don't know what the course of their training was, but I think that most of them did a great job. The only one that noticeably stood out was the Harley Race character's work in the ring, how poor it was. But I thought they did a good job of shooting the wrestling. I don't think they showed enough about just how difficult it was.
Right.
Like, like they hinted on it with the amount of substance abuse back in that time period, but but that was also the Von Erichs took it to another level than most people. So it's kind of hard to say. I'd hate for people to portray that in order to wrestle, that those things were needed. But I was also glad that they touched on it, because those are things that are involved in the wrestling business as well.
Exactly. Yeah. You hear a lot of tragedy of just young people that are still up and coming losing their life to things like that all the time.
It's something that is not as prevalent now. They do a better
Mhm.
job of looking after it than they did, say, late early's 90s right through till probably 2004, 2005.
Right.
That was probably when, you know, schedules were harder, they were longer. Guys were still wrestling 250, 300 days a year. And, back then they were just kind of bridging over into like guaranteed contracts. So back before there was guaranteed contracts, if you didn't wrestle, you didn't get paid. So guys had to take painkillers, muscle relaxers, and
Mhm.
performance enhancing drugs just to be able to get through the day to day grind. And it was to to be able to provide for their families.
Right.
And then it went from being able to provide for their families to numbing the pain of not being with their families as well. So I think now in wrestling, where schedules are lighter, it's better for that side of the business, better for the quality of life for the wrestlers, definitely. So
Mhm.
yeah, there's been a lot of changes in the business in the last, say, 20 years.
Yeah, I've even noticed more focus on concussions and things like that than there used to be. Just
Definitely.
recently. Yeah.
100%. I know myself that, you got a concussion one night. It was, here, take some Vicodin, and you got to get hit in the head with a chair tonight too. And maybe the next night, maybe the next night. And it was all about the show and, suck it up, kid. We got,
Right.
we're doing business here. So, now that would never happen now, or should never happen. We have the
No.
education now. There wasn't so much education around concussions, and probably until the last, well, I think the Chris Benoit incident probably brought more prevalent than anything, right? I think that really drew
Right.
a lot of attention to CTE and the dangers of getting hit in the head night after night for decades. So I think there's more awareness in the wrestling business because of that. But also you add the rest of the world, where there's been movies, Concussion by Will Smith, and then a lot of the deaths that occur in the NFL as well, and the
Mhm.
tragedies that have occurred there. I think it's become more educated for both the fans, who don't require their athletes to go to that extreme levels anymore. And I think it's become more of a liability now for most organizations. And they don't want to see something like a Chris Benoit incident. They don't want to see the incidents of the shotguns in the parking lot, suicides that happened in the NFL. So
Yeah.
you know, it saved tragedies in life is how the families and the athletes are looking at it, and bad business as far as the companies they work for, so.
Right. Yeah, even just Monday night, I was watching wrestling, and there was a botched move where a guy got drop kicked, and when he fell, he hit his head really hard, and the ref just stopped the match. It was over. And normally, like back, like you said, around 2000, 2004, you would never see that happen. It would just keep going. But they just ended the match. They're like, all right, you guys won. That's it.
And that's something that would happen. And if that happened in the UFC and somebody got knocked down and
Exactly.
their eyes were a little spinny, the ref would stop the fight. He would step in. But
Exactly.
for decades in pro wrestling, it didn't matter what happened. You could be concussed and, not know where you are and not know what day it is, but you finished the match. And not only was it expected, by it was expected by the locker room then, it was expected by the promoter then, and then soon the burden was on yourself if you were going to be one of the boys, that you had to expect that from yourself as well. And it just became a culture where it's always you finish the match no matter what. That was something that was bred into us from the first day that we started training, and that the show must go on. And there's been some terrible, terrible examples of the show must go on. The
Hmm.
Owen Hart's death in Kansas being one of them.
Yeah,
Owen Hart dies at the beginning of the show, and they drag him out, and the next show goes on. So
exactly. Yeah. You have all these guys who are friends with him trying to still perform after finding out like one of their best friends just died in the ring. I couldn't imagine.
yeah, it's the business has taken its toll on a lot of people, but it's that passion that we have to perform, that passion we have to have a positive influence on our fans. And I think in the last 10 years, and that's one thing with me now being in charge of and owning Red Rock Wrestling, where I can make those changes and enforce those changes so that our athletes are better protected or better looked after. And, with my experience in both healthcare and being able to look at it from somebody who was a full-time wrestler, I have a better job of the mindset of the wrestler and the guy that's going to say, "Oh, no, no, I'm okay, I'm fine." But to be able to step in and say, "No, you're not fine, and you're not wrestling tonight, or you're not going back and doing that tag match later tonight," or
Right.
to be able to sit in the back and say, finish this match, get this, stop this match now. So it allows me to be able to see things from both sides, both as a medical professional and as somebody that's wrestled and can know the mindset from both sides and be able to make a decision based on the experience of both.
Right. When did you decide you wanted to be a professional wrestler?
I've always, as a child, I always wanted to be a professional wrestler. I started out my sport of choice as a teenager, and that was a basketball player. I played high level basketball. I played Canada games. I was an all star at every high school basketball tournament in Atlantic Canada, and junior teams and team all through like summer leagues when interprovincial play was going on, and I was recruited by 13 different schools to go play basketball across the
Oh,
country.
wow.
So a knee injury kind of ended that. And after knee surgery, I get into lifting weights. Now I was a wrestling fan through through the whole time. I was always a big wrestling fan, and grew up watching Grand Prix wrestling from the time I was a child, 8 or 9 years old. I grew up on Leo Burke, the Cuban Assassin, Killer Carl Troop, the Beast, Sweet Daddy Siki. That's what I grew up watching. And then later, as PEI got more than two TV stations, and we ended up being able to see some WWF, and then of course a big Hulk Hogan fan, Demolition, all that. But realistically, and it's funny when I say this to people and even to other wrestlers, I never thought I was big enough, because when I seen these people as a child, these people were larger than life, the Killer Carl Krups, the Leo Burks, and everyone like that. And then later on in the 80s era of wrestling, Hulk Hogan, 6'8", 300 pounds, Big John
Yeah.
Studd, 6'9", Andre the Giant, Tugboat Typhoon, all these massive guys that are 6'6" to 7 feet, 400 pounds, 300 pounds. There wasn't too many small guys in wrestling. And the irony of that is, even at the time that I got into wrestling, I thought I was too small until one day I met Edge and Christian at the Atlantic Fitness Center. And Glenn Kolka, actually, Glenn Kolka was an NFL player or CFL player that was being trained by Bret Hart. And he was supposed to be the next Goldberg. He was
Huh.
6'6", probably 320. And yeah, he was massive, and he was a terror on the football field. He actually has a radio show and a podcast now on Sirius Radio or whatever. But he was absolutely massive, and he was being trained to be the next Bill Goldberg. And he actually blew out both his knees on his entrance in Saskatchewan. He was supposed to wrestle Bret Hart, and he
Oh,
jumped up on the second rope. And when he jumped down, he hyperextended both knees, and that was the end of his career.
oh
But anyway,
wow.
but I met him at the Atlantic Fitness Center, and I noticed this big, massive man, and I went up to him. It's PEI, right? So I'm like, "You're not from here," and he's like, "No, I'm in town wrestling." And I said, "Wrestling? I didn't see any promotion for wrestling." He goes, "No, we don't promote very well." And on that tour was Glenn Kolka, Edge, Christian, Rick Martel, Bad News Brown, Rip Rogers, I forget who else, 1997. And he said, "Do you want to work out together?" I said, "Yeah, sure." He goes, "I had a rough night last night." He was at Myron's the night before and pretty hungover. So he said, "Do you want to work out?" He goes, "I usually work out with those two skinny guys over there." And he pointed to Edge and Christian. And he goes, "But I don't feel like changing weights all day today." So I was, 6'6", probably 265, 270 at the time, pretty muscular. And so we just started working out, and I started asking some questions. "Oh, so you're wrestling?" And he said, "Yeah." He goes, "You should get into it." He goes, "You're sitting here chirping back and forth to other guys at the gym. You're pretty charismatic." And he goes, I said, "I don't think I'm big enough." And he pointed over to Edge and Christian again. They were probably 215 and 225 at the time. He said, "Oh, those two guys are big enough. You're definitely big enough." And then Scott D'Amore was actually there too. And
Sure.
Scott was short and chubby at the time. And there he's like, "Well, that little guy can wrestle." He's like, "You can too." So he gave me Emile Dupre's phone number. And probably about 6 months later, I worked up the courage to give him a call. And he told me to send him some pictures. And back then internet wasn't really a thing. So, you took some pictures with your camera, got the film developed, and then mailed them to him. And he later on called me back, and he said, "Yeah, yeah, you look the part. I'll train you."
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you were trained, excuse me, you were trained like in the Maritimes locally?
Yeah, I was trained in Shediac. It was an old bowling alley in Shediac that had a ring set up in it. And originally, I started training with Emile. Rene Dupre was training there at the time, and the two of us were doing workouts. There was another guy there from Moncton, and there was a few guys that started the training, but everybody started weeding out until finally it was just me. There was probably 8 or 10 guys that Emile said he'd try to train, and those guys just kept getting hurt and leaving and hurt and leaving. And I was just too stubborn. I was hurt. I bruised my kidneys. I was pissing blood, and I was beat up, and I was going to do it. Once I committed that I was doing it, they were going to have to drag me out of there in a body bag to get me to quit. So I continued training there with them, and I was a slow learner. I wasn't a great student at all. I just had a good body and was very durable, and I was the last man standing basically. So I had a real communication problem with Emile at the time, because Emile spoke like a broken English, and he didn't really, although he was, Emil's a legend and he knew how to do everything, but he wasn't great at actually explaining anything. He would stand in the middle of the ring and he'd say, "Do you know something? I'm going to shoot you off the rope and I want you to do the bloop bloop." And I didn't know what the bloop bloop was. And he'd shoot me off the ropes and then he'd punch me in the throat or, I never understood what he was saying. He said, "Do the bing bing, the boop boop, and and I never knew what, I'm like, what the hell is that? Like, I grew up watching wrestling. I know the name of every wrestling move I think going, but I don't
Yeah.
know what the bing bing and the bloop bloop was. Um, so there was a real communication issue, and Renee would try to explain it a bit, but it was still, his English wasn't great at the time either. He was a young kid. So they later on brought in Hubert Gallant, who used to wrestle for Grand Prix Wrestling, and Hubert explained things very well to me. And so by this point, I just went from being barely trained. I knew how to take a fall. I knew how to body slam. I knew how to kick, kind of, knew how to run the ropes. And then they just threw me on the road full time. I went on the road for 156 nights straight. And
Wow.
we went on the road with Grand Prix Wrestling. And fortunate enough for me, I got to start with the Cuban Assassin, the Beast, No Class Bobby Pass, Butcher Vachon was on that tour, Chuck Sims. A lot of the old Grand Prix guys came back for a Legends tour, and they knew that I really wanted to learn the business and that I had a passion for it. So every night at the end of the show, I sucked. I was terrible my first year. They would say, okay, they'd watch my match, all the old time guys, and then they would bring me in afterwards. And at first, all the guys had 100 things to tell me that I was doing wrong. And then the Cuban kind of took over and he said, all right. He says, you're doing 100 things wrong, but every night we're just going to work on two things and we're going to teach you how to do two things right.
Established in November 2015, the Cook's Edge is a retail chef supply store and dealer of hand-forged Japanese knives. They are proud to work directly with small knife makers from Japan to bring the best kitchen tools available to their customers and clientele. They also offer full-service knife sharpening and knife repair with clients from all over Canada and the United States. Their online store, thecooksedge.com, has their full catalog of chef tools, cookbooks, and apparel. Thank you to Cook's Edge for sponsoring this episode.
So, the hotel rooms at the end of the night would be pulled out on the floor and the guys would show me how to do things and work on things and how to do them right. And every night, two things, two things, two things. And those guys were so good to me. I couldn't have asked for a better time to break into the business and just to be going up and down the road every night, learning ring psychology and, hearing from those guys how different guys like the Von Erichs and the Joe Blanchards and all these guys, all these territories, these guys worked and how they booked territories and angles they worked and to be able to sit in those cars and hear those stories and hear why things were done in wrestling and not just for the sake of two guys going out and doing 100 big moves and nearly killing each other, but they helped start the process of teaching me how to tell a story.
That's awesome. Yeah, wrestling today, you see a lot of that where it's just like crazy flipping move after move, and it's almost exhausting to watch. And by the end of it, you haven't taken anything away from it. It's just over. But I did notice, like, even watching Red Rock, there was a match. It was like basic style, nothing super flashy. But then at one point, he busts out a move off the top rope, and the crowd went nuts. Like, it was such well told story, like good ring psychology. It was completely different.
And that's what we're more about storytelling and psychology. And it's like if you have a movie and the whole thing's car crashes, car crash doesn't mean anything when you see the 10th one,
Exactly.
and then when you have to see 20 more after that, well, it's just another car crash. So, the art of storytelling is building up to those big moments. And I've been very fortunate. I've worked in all the top wrestling companies in the world. I've been fortunate. I spent 2 years in Puerto Rico, where I got to learn from Bushwhacker Luke, who is one of the greatest bookers ever. Savio Vega, spent lots of time with Savio Vega. There's another guy that was down there, Flash Flanagan, and Randy Orton. He helped train. He pretty much trained Randy Orton, and Randy Orton
Okay.
actually speaks highly of him. Flash was an incredible worker. He worked as Slash Venom down there. If you ever get a chance to look at Slash Venom highlight film from IWA Puerto Rico, he's one of the best workers ever. And he was one of the best finish guys. He could come. He was the guy who did a lot of finishes, and even a lot of the times, like Randy Orton and those guys would call him while we were down there and ask for, hey, do you got a finish that, an idea for a finish? So,
That's cool.
Flash was one of the best workers and one of the greatest minds in the business. And him and I lived together in Puerto Rico, so we'd be always talking about finishes. And at the end, I ended up being one of the finish guys for IWA Puerto Rico, which to this day, one of the hottest territory periods in the history of wrestling, from 2001 till 2005. We sold out 30,000 people in baseball stadiums. We did 10,000 every night for TV and Bayamon. A small house for us on the island was 2,500 people on a Sunday night. So,
Wow.
business was booming. It was all because of great storytelling and great psychology. And I was very fortunate. I also got to travel with the legendary Brian Dixon from when I worked in England for a couple of years, and got to pick his mind as a promoter. And Brian Dixon, is, other than Vince McMahon, probably the most successful promoter in the history of wrestling. And to do the long car rides from him, and to learn from, some of these legends, I've been very fortunate to be able to work in these places and to form friendships with these people, where we're all like-minded about the fact that storytelling is the number one, not only the stories and the talking and that, but how to tell those stories in the ring, and
Hmm.
to be able to learn from those legends of how to do both is, I think, the reason why Red Rock Wrestling has been so successful, and why we are so recognizable in the world of wrestling today. Whether it's England, Puerto Rico, other parts of Canada, we've created a good reputation and a good name in the wrestling
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah. So, with your style of wrestling, is that something you kind of put together from working with other people, or did you kind of have your style set right away in ring?
No, when I started pro wrestling, Leo Burke once told me the business had took a huge change in how things were done between 2001 and 2003. Before 2001, the way to most people got jobs with WWE and the NWA at that point was, you went around and you learned as many different styles as you could, so that you could work anybody. So Leo always instilled in guys like myself and Brody Steele that travel as much as you can, learn as many styles you can, and be good enough that you can work with somebody even if you can't speak the language. And that's an incredible skill to have. And so there's obviously a British style. There's a Lancashire style of wrestling that's it's a quite different and there's different styles from area to area. There's actually the Maritimes has a quite noticeable style. Ours in Calgary's is quite the same, and a lot of that is because of a lot of the stars of Grand Prix traveled to Calgary for the winters and then back home here for the summers. And it's kind of a hybrid of Japanese style and a brawling style. And Puerto Rico is more of a brawling style. Japanese is more of like a work shoot type of catch wrestling style,
Yeah.
which is, from Gotch and the Inoki, following the Gotch prototype to a more believable style there. It's kind of strayed in the past in the last couple of years, but that's the foundation of those. So my goal was to travel around and learn a little bit from all of those and kind of take what I could do well from each of those styles and put them together. So if I go to Japan, I can wrestle the Japanese style. If I go to Puerto Rico, I wrestled a completely different style in Puerto Rico than I did in England. And I took a little bit of both of those and kind of mixed them together for the style that I used when I wrestled for Red Rock. So,
Okay, that's awesome. It's it's fascinating. You don't really think about it, but yeah, there is different styles for everywhere. Like Mexico
yeah.
has their luchador style. Japan, like you said, it seems like they are really hard hitting, like with
The
strikes.
older style, the old All Japan and the old New Japan stuff, everything was hard hitting and very physical. Even when I was there in 2005, it was very physical. It was still that strong style type.
Yeah.
And then whenever I was in Puerto Rico, for the heavyweights and the super heavyweights, it was more of a brawling style where a lot of the guys on the undercard was more of a Mexican lucha libre style. But
Mhm.
it just seemed that in Puerto Rico, the violence is what sold. It was, they call it the land of blood and guts for a reason. So, there's a lot of blood and there was a lot of violence, and just getting to the ring was violent. You could be hit with spark plugs and batteries and rocks, and the odd time, you even might get shot at when you're leaving the building if you got enough heat that night. So it was, I was very fortunate to get into wrestling when I did. I got to be able to be a part of, like I said, I got to be a part of the biggest wrestling companies when a lot of them were at their peak. IWA Puerto Rico, like I said, was one of the biggest organizations ever. I got to be a part of New Japan Pro Wrestling when guys like Chono and Liger and were there. So it's I was in England, and I got to meet a lot of the stars over there, Johnny Saint and a lot of these. Robbie Brookside and I traveled the roads together, who's now the head trainer at NXT. So I got to learn a lot of the craft from guys like that, and guys like Frankie Sloan, who are veterans. Dave Taylor, I got to learn from him when I was in Germany. I was very fortunate. I was part of one of the last long German catch tournaments. If you're not familiar with what the German catch tournaments were, some of the greatest wrestlers ever used to stay there for 3 months at a time and wrestle at the same building every night for 90 days straight. So
Oh wow.
guys like Fit Finley and Chris Benoit, Owen Hart, Rip Rogers, Dave Taylor, Otto Vance. Uh, it's just so many huge stars that learn their craft. Rhino. Um, yeah, there's so many guys that were William Regal. That's where he spent most of his times. That's actually he was deciding whether he was going to go to WCW or not because he was making so much money working in the catch tournaments.
Wow.
I, so I was very lucky that I got to catch the tail end of that and be a part of these huge traditional spots. And again, what a great place to learn when you're stuck in the same building for weeks at a time and you have all these great minds around you. Drew McDonald, all these guys that were just brilliant. To sit around a table with Dave Taylor, Drew McDonald, Robbie Brookside, Rick Steiner, and sit around and learn your craft and tell stories with this guy. It was just an amazing experience that I'm so grateful I got to be a part of. And I'm trying to use all those experiences and all that knowledge to make Red Rock Wrestling, the best wrestling company in the country. We're in the smallest province in the country, but we're drawing some of the biggest crowds, and we're drawing some of the biggest crowds because we put on good quality shows. We have great talent. Like the Maritimes has such phenomenal talent. I've wrestled all over the world, and our guys are on par with everywhere else. And now for me to see guys like Bradford Montague, Chris Cook, two Island boys, that are excelling in this
Mhm.
business right now, and those two guys are as good as anybody. And
Yeah.
to be able to pass down that knowledge to them, and not only that, but to use it as a platform to raise money for charitable organizations on Prince Edward Island. It's great to have that support from Islanders. hashtag has always been, and our motto has always been Islanders for Islanders, because we're not just coming into your community and putting on a show. You know, we developed Red Rock Wrestling because we were tired of the bad things that were going on in wrestling, promoters coming in and setting up shows and then not paying the arenas and not paying the, you know, the hotels, or maybe not paying the newspapers, and then they would just leave, and then, you know, wrestling got a bad name. You know,
Mm-hmm.
people, they just go on to the next town, and I wanted to start Red Rock Wrestling to be here at home so that we could have functions that supported local charities, and that we wouldn't give wrestling a bad name by saying, oh, they're just a carny organization that's in and gone, and nobody cares. That's why it's important for me to not only promote shows here, but I live here, and you know, I'm going to be accountable for everything that goes on with Red Rock Wrestling.
Right. How did you get the name Cowboy?
So back in the 1950s and 60s, before Emile Dupre opened Grand Prix Wrestling, there was a promoter whose name was Cowboy Len Hughes. So,
Oh,
so Cowboy Len Hughes was the promoter, and he promoted shows all around the Maritimes. And at the end of it, um, to date, no, it's still not clear. Emile and him partnered up for a little bit, and then they had a falling out, and you know, there's a lot of different stories. I've heard both sides. Whatever. I don't know which one was there. I wasn't there. But so whenever I went over to train with Emile, Cowboy Len Hughes was a draw here in the 50s and 60s, and Emile was a stickler for everything that happened in the olden days was the best, right? So
right.
when I came over, he just seen the name Hughes, and he said, I'm going to tell everybody that you're Cowboy Len Hughes' grandson. So I was
Okay.
like, but it was my own name anyway. So they spelt it with a C, and I wore the cowboy hat and the jeans to the ring at the time. And I'll be honest, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. Um, it was something that kind of grew on me. And then I left. Emile and I had a falling out, and he didn't hire me back, but he had told me that he had the rights to my name, Kowboy Mike Hughes, with a C. And then somebody else told me, well, just switch it to spelling it with a K. So that's why I switched it to spell it with a K. But I had tried to change my name. Actually, I wrestled probably 20 shows as Sheamus, believe it or not.
Weird.
And I still have posters of with me on them with the name Sheamus. And I wanted to switch my character to like an Irish longshoreman, because I had worked as a longshoreman offloading potato boats for times between, like when I first started wrestling, right before I started wrestling. So I was tried to switch it to that, but when we went around to the towns and they announced me as Sheamus, the fans kept chanting Cowboy. So you know, the fans at the end of the day have final say. So we were like, what the hell? Let's just spell it with a K, and we'll get around that, and we'll Cowboy Mike Hughes, and it's been Cowboy ever since. Now it strayed from there, from the blue jeans and the cowboy hat, to more of a biker gimmick for a lot of years through Real Action Wrestling and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just kind of, now it's just me now, right? It's just ended up being the pretty much the same Mike Hughes that's in the ring is the same Mike Hughes you'll meet at the Iron Claw movie, right? There's not much difference anymore. I don't know if I've become the cowboy or the cowboy's become me. So you know,
Yeah,
but
your character has become you. It's kind of like the Undertaker. How
it,
he
very
gets to the
much
end of
so.
it. He's the Undertaker. You're the cowboy.
Yeah, when you live it for 25 years, you know, I've been cowboy for more than half of my life. So, you know, it's how it ends up.
Yeah. Do you prefer performing as a good guy or a bad guy, like a face or a heel, for people who might not know?
Um, in foreign countries, I've always liked to be the heel.
Hmm.
It's just been easy and it's been fun. And I like I've wrestled in a lot of places where being a heel was dangerous. You know, we've had riots in India. We did a show in India where we had 100,000 people. Like we outdrew WrestleMania that year. We were in India, and that was
Wow.
headlined by Brody Steele and the Great Khali, and myself and Jinder Mahal wrestled on that card.
Oh,
And that was
cool.
I think 4 months before he went back to WWE. But we sold out a cricket stadium, and it was full. Not only the stadium but the whole field. And then there was people lined up outside that couldn't get in. And we had done some pretty controversial press conferences going in. Brody Steele, who was my tag partner, said that we were going to recolonize India after we had after we defeated Great Khali. And Khali had Prime Minister Modi giving like backing him on the news, and he had some of the CMs, which would be the equivalent of premiers, like backing him. And we were saying that after we beat him, we were coming for them and we were gonna recolonize this shithole. And people were genuinely upset. Like we were covered by CNN India, and this was all over the news, and to the point where we had they put us in a hotel, and they had to put military all through the hotel, and nobody else was allowed to stay in the hotel. And we had 10,000 protesters out front burning effigies, and
Wow.
it was pretty scary. If you go into Google and you Google cowboy in India, there's a big write up about the whole what we had to go through. But we had death threats, and things were pretty scary. But believe it or not, like that sounds scary to most people, but we had a blast. Like we would take turns going to the balconies and insulting the people and riling them up, and it just made for a more livelier crowd. And at the end of that tour, when Khali got his comeuppance and beat Brody Steele and all the evil white people, and the place came off the roof. Well, there wasn't a roof, but if there was a roof on that cricket stadium, it would have come off. So yeah, it's
That's
pretty
awesome.
amazing. But as a baby face, there's no greater role, especially on PEI, than being a babyface here and being a role model. And even when I was in Newfoundland, I was a heel there for many years. We had a regular TV show on NTV, and I used to go over there and we would wrestle a week, film all the TV, and then we'd take 4 weeks off. But we would play the TV weekly and then come back and film more. But I was a heel for the first probably 2 years there. In the last 2 years, I was a babyface, and to be able to go into the Janeway Center for over there as the Children's Hospital, to be able to bring joy to all the faces. And I visit a lot of sick children here on PEI when they're either at the palliative stage at the palliative care center, or
Hmm.
when they're on peds. To be a baby face, to be able to have that, bring that much joy to people in their final times and their final hours. And so that the families can see in those last minutes that their loved ones have joy. And that if all I can do is show up and provide some time, that's the greatest gift. That you know forget any $1 million contract or anything like that. Being able to provide that joy to somebody when they're sick or in their final times, or encouragement or motivation, is the greatest gift in the world. And that's something that wrestling's given me, and it's a reason why I feel like I always owe wrestling. you know
It must be really humbling to do
it
something like that.
the first couple of times, I actually, it kind of, it just messed with my head. There was a young boy that wanted to see me in his final days, and his request, when the palliative care center called me, and they said that before this young man dies, he wants you to be there in his final hours. And I'm like, why me? Like, why me? There's what, 7 billion people on the planet. Why me?
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It, it was hard for me to get my head around at first, and then I think you have to look back when you're a child to how much your heroes on TV and how much you idolize these people and how much you have to go back and be a child again and remember how those people made you feel, I guess, to actually get it. But it's still very humbling and still baffling to me that it's me, right? I'm just Mike from Stratford, PEI, right? So
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, as a kid, you see pro wrestlers. To me, they were like my superheroes when I was a kid
absolutely.
because it was such like it was a battle of good and evil. Like that's what I grew up watching. So
It's
I
the
totally
easiest story.
understand.
Sorry, it's the easiest story in the world to tell, and it's the greatest like gift you can give or to accept is to be somebody's hero and to have somebody idolize you. I remember like when you're a child and you just get a high five from one of your heroes, whether it's a hockey player or a wrestler or whatever,
Mhm.
when they're coming off the ice, like that's one of the, you know, kids remember that for the rest of their life, you know.
Yeah.
I still hear guys today that are 50 or 60 that are, talking about the first time that they high-fived a hockey player or a wrestler. People still come up to me and tell me stories about when the first time they seen Grand Prix wrestling or first time they seen the Beast or the Cuban, and their eyes just light up. So,
Yeah. First high five from a wrestler I ever got was Rob Van Dam in Charlottetown. I was like 16 and I will never forget it.
right? Like
Yeah.
it's those moments. And if that's all you have to do is
Yep.
high five somebody, have a little conversation with somebody to create a memory for the rest of your life. One thing that really bothers me in pro wrestling today, and what that promoters do, are these charged meet and greets at the beginning of a
Mm.
show to try to exploit fans even more by charging somebody $50 more than the price of a ticket. You are going to see these people at the intermission signing autographs and just all of my talent, they are meeting and greeting at the intermission, and
Mhm.
that's just part of being a pro wrestler.
Dr. B's Elixir All Natural Cooling Mouth Spray is the world's first immediate relief to the mouth burning pain caused by spicy food. Dr. B's patented formula prevents and eliminates the pain caused by hot peppers from jalapenos to habaneros, all the way up to the world record hottest pepper on the planet, Pepper X. Just 5 to 10 sprays beforehand and you can enjoy the spiciest chilies, salsas, or ethnic foods. Or, if you're brave and want to test your spice pain threshold, wait and spray after you eat to instantly take the pain away. The secret is 2 natural compounds found in hops. Yes, the same hops used to make beer. These compounds, when concentrated, create a cooling sensation that literally tricks our brains into not feeling the pain of spicy foods. Dr. B's Elixir All Natural Cooling Mouth Spray, all the heat, all the flavor, none of the pain. Dr. B's, get it while it's hot at drbselixir.com. Thanks to Dr. B's for sponsoring the show.
But to try to exploit or charge somebody an extra $30 to maybe say hi, what you would get the same at the intermission, or even take the time after the show, I think that's something that wrestlers should do, because that's part of the job of being a role model. That's part of the job of being a professional wrestler. And it's just common courtesy. Do you know what I mean? If you pay for your ticket and you buy merchandise at the intermission and you shouldn't have to charge somebody extra money just to meet them,
Right.
and that's one of my pet peeves in wrestling is when people are always, it's about that extra dollar, and wrestling's not always about that extra dollar, right? It's about those
Yeah.
memories that we said, and you shouldn't have to charge somebody to shake their hand or charge somebody for to be able to talk to them for a few minutes. To me, if that talent can't make themselves available for the fans that allow them to live their dream at the intermission or after the show, then those people won't be working for me.
Right. I've heard recently stories about Cody Rhodes after the shows in WWE going through the crowd and like shaking hands with kids and stuff to the point where backstage crew have to like get him out of there because he's just seems like such a good guy to like hang out with the crowd. Recently agreed to be someone's best man in their wedding that had a sign.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's great stuff, right?
you never hear stuff like that in WWE, but yeah, like um, with Red Rock, that was my son's favorite part. Intermission, going around, getting to see all these wrestlers and getting his picture taken with Bradford Montague, like I mentioned, and like that's that made the moment for him. Like he talked about it for days.
And you think right now, at a time when our economy is stretched, households are stretched.
Mm-hmm.
And usually the first thing that goes in a budget is entertainment. You know, it's tough right now when you're trying to pay for heat, food, housing right now is at an all-time high.
Yeah.
And for people to be able to just get the money together to pay for a ticket and to pay for, you know, a small souvenir, whether it's a $5 picture or whatever, for those kids to sign to make those moments, but to try to extract another $30 from somebody for a meet and greet and extra charging. I don't even agree with some companies do it and whatever, but my opinion, for somebody to ask for a picture with their cell phone, like a selfie with somebody, like it's a selfie, right? Like some people, not everybody can afford, you know, to shell out that. They have 4 or 5 kids. They can't buy everybody a t-shirt. They can't buy everybody a, you know, a picture all the time. And somebody wants to take a selfie with me, they can have a selfie with me anywhere, anytime. And there's not going to be a, a fee attached to it, you know. And I've got to live my dream and travel the world because people supported me, and to try to bleed every nickel and dime out of them just seems wrong to me.
Right. So in the last couple of years, you suffered quite an injury, correct?
Yes, I I've suffered many over the years, but the I tore my Achilles heel coming out of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I Things were just starting to open up, and I went to play basketball at my friend's place, and I just cut down to the bottom of the key, and I pushed off, and I heard this pop. It sounded like a shotgun went off, and I thought somebody had kicked me in the back of the knee, and I turned around actually to punch whoever kicked me, and there was nobody standing behind me. So, you know, it was devastating. It's a terrible injury. It's mentally draining too, because there's so many horror stories of Achilles ruptures not healing properly and people being crippled from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been fortunate enough to heal to, probably I'd say I'm at 75%, but a re-rupture is just something that has the possibility of disabling me. So I that's what forced me to retire, and it might be a blessing in disguise because I've suffered 18 documented concussions, so I'm like 12 over the limit of what any athlete's supposed to sustain. So, and probably more than that, but just ones that have been diagnosed. So, unfortunately, I'll admit that my it's funny that my Achilles is the thing that has made me decide to retire when it should have been protecting my brain. But 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 I guess it's a blessing in disguise that my Achilles will probably save my brain.
Yeah. Was it um what was it like trying to step into a commissioner role instead of being like an in-ring performer? Like I guess you're
It's
still a performer, but you're not as in a physical role.
it's it's not quite the adrenaline rush. It's not quite the pressure of performing physically anymore. And it's I wanted to actually step into the behind the curtain more. And then I just kept getting a lot of messages from fans and people that were saying, you know, we come to support you, we want to see you. And it's not the same without seeing you.
Mm-hmm.
So then I had to come up with a way that I could be more focused and back for the people, right? So I it was one of those things where I was like, okay, it's my time to step back and let more people shine. But then you give the fans what they want, and the fans, asked, they wanted me to have a more active, visible role, and so that was the best way to do it without risking injury, but still being able to be in front of the crowd and in front of the people.
Yeah, it was quite a pop whenever Cowboy came out at the show in Stratford we were at.
I have the most amazing fans. I've been so lucky over, the fans of Prince Edward Island have supported me with all my charitable fundraising events that I've done. We've done not only wrestling events, but we've done a lot of events, myself and Jason Mosier, and my wife and his wife, Dawn, my wife, Sherry Atkinson. We've done so many events over the years. We've done Harley motorcycle draws. We did the Fight for the Cure, where we've done a collaboration of jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, boxing, and pro wrestling. And we've done, I think there's one of those giant checks behind us there
Yeah,
for Canadian Cancer Society. There's another big one over there. I think we've raised almost $250,000 in 13 years for different charitable organizations, from MS Society to Habitat for Humanity to the Canadian Cancer Society. And everything that I've done, the people of Prince Edward Island and my fans have really come out to support us. And we feel it's really important to give back. They support us to be able to put on these great shows. It doesn't matter how great the performance in the ring are, and we have the greatest talent, but if there's nobody in those stands, it doesn't mean anything. We wrestle for them, and they come out and support us for that, and it's a reciprocal relationship that we have. And they've made it so that, like I said, we're the smallest province in the country, but we have the biggest and probably some of the loudest fans, and it's
yeah,
amazing. And you know a lot of wrestling promotions want to take credit that we've done this. It's the fans that make everything, and it's the continued support of the fans that will keep this going. When the fans decide that they don't want to, then there will be no more Red Rock Wrestling. But we keep coming out and giving it every night because it gives us a platform to support all these charitable organizations. I get to teach young guys how to get to the next level to chase their dreams, and we get that support from the fans, right? And it's amazing. It's all about the fans, and it's all about the support that we give.
right. Now that you're in more of a speaking role instead of wrestling, like people, when they think professional wrestling, they're like, okay, it's two guys go in their underwear and they wrestle, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But they don't realize there's acting, there's the physical part, all the training, and there's also the promo. Like, do you find it harder to cut promos or to do the physical in-ring work?
Um, there was times when each was difficult. At the
Mhm.
first of it, both were difficult. Then the talking part actually became easier for me. Once we get into the real action wrestling days, I get more confidence my second and third year.
Mhm.
And then as I traveled more, the techniques and everything became easier. But every night that you're in that ring, you're working on both. And but the promos actually, for me, just like I said earlier, there's not much difference between Cowboy and Mike Hughes anymore, and everything is just genuine and just comes from me. So I find that easy for me. For years when we taped TV, I would, they used to call me the one take wonder. I always had to just do thing once, and I just cut my promo and then just walk out of the studio, right? And so that became pretty good for me. But yeah, it's just stuff that takes whatever. It's about doing reps, no matter what it is. If it's doing promos, you have to do them in the mirror every night, and practice them, and or now you can use them on your cell phone. Back when I started, we didn't have cell phones, so you can practice them on the cell phone and delete them. But I think anything, it's the amount of reps and experience is what makes you good at it. So
Right. Did you have any meet your hero moments where people say don't meet your heroes? Like
I
those.
did. It's funny because it was a meet your hero moment that was bad that later on turned to good. When I was in England in 2003, I was on tour over there, and we were in Plymouth, England, and Jake the Snake Roberts, who was probably at the lowest point in his career, in his life
Hmm.
and his career, came into the dressing room, and I had been a huge Jake the Snake Roberts fan, and I was sitting in the locker room, and Jake came in, snake over his shoulder, a big feathery pipe, smoking crack, and drinking alcohol and talking all at the same time.
Oh,
And I didn't know whether to be disgusted or impressed that he pulled all of that off at the same time. And he came in and he's like, "Where's the Canadian? Where's the Canadian?" He's like, "I heard you know Leo Burke." And he came over and he sat down, and he was great there, and he was talking and everything, but he was so like out of his mind, and and just came off as a friendly but like terrible person. And then that night in the ring, he actually passed out in the ring.
oh no.
And I believe it was Kazarni that actually he had him in a chin lock, and Jake passed out, actually went to sleep, and Kazarni got up and like he had him in a front face lock, and then just pushed Jake back and gave himself the DDT, and then rolled Jake onto him
Oh
and
wow.
pinned him. But we get out, and Jake was just a blithering moron, and he actually got deported the next day. And I was like, oh man. And then fast forward now to, I think maybe it was 2015, 2016. Jake had just got out of recovery
Hmm.
with Diamond Dallas Page, and he was about to go back on tour, but they were only allowing him to go on tour Dallas and Kazarni, who was actually became one of his best friends and kind of looked after him. Um, they were only going to send him with guys that would be responsible to kind of babysit him a little bit in his first weeks
Okay.
out of recovery. So Jake came on tour with us in Newfoundland for the week, and it was a completely different Jake. He was such a great guy. He was kind and caring and giving and want to teach and want to help the young guys. And he took us out one night to a steakhouse, and he was paying for everything at this nice steakhouse. And I went to the bathroom, and he came in and he goes, "Mike, it was so nice to meet you this week." I said, "You don't remember meeting me?" And he said, "We traveled like for a while in England, like a week or so together in England." And he goes, "What?" And I said, "You don't remember, do you?" And he said, "No." And he goes, "What was I like?" And I said, "You were an absolute piece of shit, Jake." I said, "You were one of my heroes." And I said, "You just completely disgusted me." And he broke down, he cried. And then I felt terrible for saying that to him. And Jake came over and he hugged me, and he said, "I'm so sorry." He said, "I hope that I can make up, my mistakes and everything in my recovery to all the people I let down." And he just hugged me, and we cried in the bathroom at a steakhouse in Newfoundland. And after that, the rest of the tour, we were just had a great time. So at first, yeah, meeting my heroes was a complete letdown, but afterwards, and knowing what he's been through and everything like that, it was great to see my heroes after that. Yeah,
Yeah, it's incredible the transformation he's made.
it's
It's
incredible. And I've been very fortunate. Like I've got to meet a lot of my heroes in like my tryout when I did WWE in 2003, when I did Monday Night Raw. It was, well, I guess it was SmackDown. Met Hulk Hogan when he was Captain America or Mr. America or whatever. He wasn't too happy about that. That was the night he debuted as Mr. America, but
oh
but complete gentleman when I met him. Bushwhacker Luke, Savio Vega. These guys became friends of mine. Bret Hart, Kevin Nash, Rhino, all these guys that I grew up watching, and to be able to sit around a locker room and just shoot the shit like Diamond Dallas Page. A lot of these guys, to go on. Hacksaw Jim Duggan, another great guy. You know what I mean? Just
Love Hacksaw.
amazing guy, Hacksaw Jim Duggan. A lot of fun. Had a lot of laughs with a lot of these guys, like I said, that I grew up watching, and as a kid, and got to know them and hang out with these guys. There's been a lot of good meet your hero moments, but there's been a couple of bad ones too. It's like anything in life, right? There's good guys and bad guys, and it's not always what they portray on TV either, right? It's usually the opposite. Usually the heels are the nice guys, and baby faces are usually the guys that are the more disappointing.
If you could wrestle anyone, past or present, now that we're talking about heroes, who would you pick to be that guy?
Wow, that's a tough one. Just for the sake of nostalgia and for the sake of saying I wrestled them, be Andre the Giant, I think.
Oh yeah,
Right? But if you're picking like an all-time great worker, like you know what, Hulk Hogan or Stone Cold Steve Austin, as far as the biggest guys in the business, Ric Flair in his prime. You take
yeah,
any of those three or the Undertaker. I think those guys right there as the guys that are well. Not, I was just about to say well-rounded for those four, but those are the four greatest probably wrestlers of all time.
that's a better way to
But
put it.
yeah, any one of those guys, that's a tough call. You know what I mean? And any of those four, I guess. I think Undertaker, Austin, Flair, any of those, Hogan.
Yeah,
That those guys, it'd be so easy, and it'd be such an easy night's work, and so great at the same time.
yeah. Whenever I think Cowboy Dream Match, my pick would be Undertaker. I think just
I think
stylistically, I think
yeah,
it'd be perfect.
stylistically, I think you're right. I think the fan in me, a guy who was very influential in my career and was one of the big reasons that I had the success that I did in Puerto Rico, was watching and the influence of Bruiser Brody's character.
Okay.
And
Yep.
so Bruiser Brody, who I've obviously died before I get into the wrestling business, but he was somebody that when I was heading to Puerto Rico, that Savio Vega and Bushwhacker Luke said, we want you to study this guy. We want you to replicate him. And because of watching a lot of film of his, I became a fan of his. And, I became a fan of his more as I became successful in Puerto Rico because of watching his style and from learning from him. So I think a Bruiser Brody match too, and which kind of matches up because Undertaker will be the first to say that Bruiser Brody was a big influence on him, right?
That's
So
right.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Last question before I let you go. I'm sure you've had people come up to you and say wrestling is fake. What's your response to something like that?
Uh it's funny. I've had people say that, but one thing I will say on Prince Edward Island, I think wrestling gets a lot more respect than it does in many of the other provinces.
Yeah.
I very rarely, yeah, you'll have maybe some drunken clown will say it, but there's very few people that come up to me and say that wrestling's fake. But for the ones I do, I always tell them I have a ring that can be set up at any time. If you want to come in, and another thing that we used to have, my ring was set up at Naturally Fit, so a
Oh,
lot of people would come in, and they would come in and they would like stand there like, oh, that's not a trampoline. And so in the Charlottetown area, or in people that would come in there, sometimes people knew that I worked out there and would come in to get autographs signed and stuff like that, and then they would see the ring, the parents would often be the ones that would question, say, "Oh, can I go?" And they'd be like, "Oh, damn, that's hard." It's steel with plywood over the top and a quarter
Yeah.
inch of foam. And those the either the ropes or the steel cables that are on, they all hurt when you hit them. It's not a bungee cord, and that's the
No.
big mistake. And when I used to run a wrestling school with Brody Steele,
Mhm.
and it's funny, we had all these guys that used to come over. We had a guy came in one time from Mount A football, and he was just finished playing for Mount A football, and he never stopped telling us about how tough he was and how he was a football player and how this was gonna be easy for him because he was a star football player and all this. He had his girlfriend with him that day, and she came over because she wanted to watch him. And he was in the ring for, I think he lasted a half hour, and he left crying with tears in his eyes. And one of the things that he said, I can do this. This is all fake. This should be easy for a football player like me. And he left crying with his tears in his eyes. While I said, come back. It's all fake. This is easy. So, it's the harder part about wrestling is not only you're falling, right? We can't fake gravity. Anybody
Mhm.
that thinks that we can fake gravity, if pro wrestlers were smart enough to fake gravity, we'd be millionaires by now. We wouldn't be getting dropped on our heads to do it. But yeah, it's anything but fake. Stu Hart used to say, wrestling's the only thing that's real. The rest of the world's fake. And if he was alive today and seen the internet, he'd be probably 100% right.
Yeah, no doubt.
Right? So it's very demanding on the body. I've broken, separated, or dislocated pretty near everything. I've had 18 concussions. It's taken its toll on me right now. Getting out of bed's harder than the average person. Remembering things is a little harder than most people, and it's taken its toll. But like I said, all the opportunities to inspire, visit, use our platform to raise money for charities and everything, I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat and wouldn't even have to think about it. So
That's fantastic. So yeah, for me, I want to thank you for how much torture you put your body through over the years. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much for coming on the show today and doing this. I had a ton of fun. Loved hearing all the stories. Really great.
my pleasure, man. Anytime.
All right. And for anyone listening, make sure you check out Red Rock Wrestling. I'm sure there's going to be some shows coming up in the near future.
We're going to have
Make
some shows coming up. We're just setting out our schedule right now. Look for us in the springtime. Follow our Red Rock Wrestling pages. We'll have some updates. We try to keep things updated there pretty recently. And get out and see a Red Rock Wrestling show. You can watch wrestling on TV. You can watch it on the internet. But to feel the energy at a Red Rock Wrestling show. Before you leave, I'll get one quick story before you go about just the
Oh,
energy at a Red Rock Wrestling show.
yes, please.
So the night that we did a cage match. It was the first cage match in Prince Edward Island in, I think maybe ever, but there might have been one back in the 70s or the 60s at the time. And that night, the premier, Dennis King, had showed up that night with his kids. And he was talking with our ring announcer that, it'd be great to make the presentation of the belt to whoever won. So at the end of the night, we he came in and presented me the title. I defeated Titus at the end, but the energy in that building that night was just incredible. And he was standing in the middle of the ring, and he said, "I've never felt anything like this." He was like, "This was incredible." He was so amazed by our fans and how much energy and how much was in the middle. So later on, his fans or his staff had asked him what was his most exciting moment in his first year as premier of Prince Edward Island. And he said, presenting Mike Hughes the belt in front of that crowd, and the energy that was in that building was definitely that. So if you go on my Instagram page and you go down through it, you can see a picture. They got him a picture of him presenting me the title in the cage that night. and I came in and autographed it for him. But that's tells you what kind of energy and what kind of, like, how the difference between watching something on video or experiencing that energy live right in front of you, and how all that energy, we, like I said before, we have the most amazing fans in the world. So yeah,
Yeah.
get out and see some live Red Rock Wrestling, and follow our Red Rock Wrestling page. Follow me at Instagram at Cowboy with a K MH. Follow all those things and keep in touch, and make sure to get out and see some live Red Rock Wrestling action, and help us support all our charitable organizations that we help out.
All right. Well, thanks again, Mike. Had a great time chatting.
Cheers.
Bye. Thanks everyone for listening. If you want to hear more Mind Picker, check out some of my previous shows and follow so you never miss a new episode. Want to help out with the show? 5-star rating would do just that. Bye.